Welcome, everyone, to our fourth episode of our webinar series, Music and Healing. I'm Carlene Graham, Director of HGO Co., Houston Grand Opera's Community and Learning Initiative.
And I'm Houston Grand Opera's Artistic and Music Director, Patrick Summers. Carlene and I are really delighted to welcome you to this ongoing series, which is exploring how music and singing are being used in a variety of ways to help heal the mind, body, and spirit. At Houston Grand Opera, we really believe that opera is much, much more than just a night out in the theater. This series is part of HGO's Seeking the Human Spirit initiative, which is a 6-year multidisciplinary initiative designed to highlight the universal spiritual themes that are raised in opera and to expand and deepen Houstonians' connections to opera and to art.
And if you missed any of our previous episodes, you can still watch them on HGO's YouTube channel in the Music and Healing playlist. So check those out. And please share it with your friends and subscribe to HGO's channels for updates and notifications. Now, I'd like to introduce our ASL interpreter today, Callie Luckett from Nightingale Interpretive Services. Thank you so much, Callie. We're glad you're with us.
Thanks, Callie. I have such a distinguished panel to host today. I'm so delighted. In this episode, we're going to explore how music can combat isolation and loneliness. To start us off, I'd like to welcome Dr. Marcel Zentner, who is professor of personality psychology, differential psychology, and diagnostics at the University of Innsbruck. Grüß Gott, doctor. Welcome. Thank you.
Grüß Gott. Well, thank you very much for beaming me from the Tyrolean Alps into Houston Opera House. It's a very great pleasure to be here. Yes, let me just start with a description of my work, which has centered on music and emotion, and especially the kinds of emotions that music can elicit. And to preface this, maybe I should say that the description of emotion, and especially the experience of emotion, describing the experience of emotion, is difficult. And understandably, attempts to characterize music-evoked emotions have faced some resistance and were always looked at with some sort of skepticism. And I think that this notion is very well captured in a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, poem To Music, where he says or describes music as the languages where languages end. But maybe it is for this reason that a systematic effort to develop sort of an emotional vocabulary that is congenial to the experience of music was never undertaken. And the lack of this language to describe musically evoked emotion has been a bit of a problem because it has misdirected research in lack of a better system to use the conventional emotion categories. And maybe you can see this on the slide, like the basic emotions such as happiness and sadness and anger and fear to describe what is evoked by emotion. And it is basically this inadequacy of a tool or a language to describe the richness of emotion that we feel in response to music that is the prime starting point of our work and the motivation for our work. So basically, we did start with a universe of over 500 emotion terms and ran several experiments to see what kind of feelings were most important or prominent or salient in response to music. And we did this across various types of music. And the result of that, and maybe we can see that now on a slide, was a system where we had 9 different categories of emotion. Yes, that's the slide with the basic emotions. And basically, I wanted to show you this photo here of the ecstatic people at the concert, just to say, this is what music can elicit. And is it really adequately kind of grasped by these sort of conventional academic emotion categories? And basically, having run all this data, we were able to find a system, and this is the next slide, in which you can see actually the emotions that were especially important. When we looked at all the data, we could kind of derive these 9 emotions. You can see them: tension, sadness, peacefulness, nostalgia, transcendence, wonder, tenderness, joyful activation, and energy. And these are not to be thought of very distinct emotions. I mean, these are more clusters that summarize certain types of feelings that are quite interrelated and therefore form a cluster. And so we have emotions here such as wonder, which is a feeling of being amazed by the music, but also seduced by the music, moved by the music. And then we have transcendence, for example, which represents more a state of being completely overwhelmed by the music, and shaken, as it were. And then we have other emotions such as nostalgia, which is also quite importantly related to memories and so on. And so we could demonstrate that this kind of taxonomy is much more powerful in accounting for music-evoked emotions than the sort of the more traditional or everyday emotion terms. Here you can see the whole thing is, of course, a little bit more complex than the former slide kind of suggested, because every emotion term is kind of formed by this single emotion, feeling terms, and so on. But I think we don't have to go into so much detail at the moment. What I think is important to say, though, is that based on this work, we've created scales, so rating scales, that can be used by researchers, by listeners, to describe what they feel in response to given pieces of music. And that can also be actually used to capture audience responses. So basically, you could imagine to give this to a whole audience and see what emotions they feel, sometimes in real time. You know, where do they navigate in this emotion space?
Wow.
Okay, so that's sort of the starting point. And then, there is a legitimate concern that when you do this work that is quite strongly relying on verbal, descriptions, that the question comes up, well, are people actually experiencing these emotions, or are they just kind of using these terms to describe the music without actually feeling that? And so that prompted a collaboration with neuroscientists, where we selected pieces that were very good at inducing some of these 9 emotion clusters, and look what happened in the brain. And we could see that actually, for example, if you give a nostalgia-inducing piece to people, we put them in the scanner, you can see a very specific activation pattern in the brain. And the same with wonder and other emotions that form part of this system. So that suggests that people are actually experiencing these states. They're not just saying that they're perceiving something that might not be related to a deeper emotional experience. Now, that was very interesting because it showed that the power of music seems to be quite direct and somewhat unmediated by, cognitive interpretation. And so from there, we thought that, well, if that is the case, perhaps you can play music to infants, pre-verbal infants that have really very limited capacity to cognitively process what's going on, and see if infants react powerfully in an emotional way to music. And just to showcase you a little bit of my research on that topic with infants, I would like to now show you a brief excerpt of a movie that was made, a documentary. It's called Fear of Dancing by a Canadian filmmaker, Alcock, and was just released a few months ago. And here we'll just see excerpts about the research I did on infants reacting, and in fact, as you will see, kind of dancing to music.
For a fantastic opportunity to study what might be there from the start, what might perhaps even be hardwired or inborn, because with a 2 or 3-year-old child, you don't know anymore. Is it learned? Did they observe it in their parents or in their environment? But with 4 or 5 months old infants, that's unlikely.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
In most cases, they actually did react, and I think that was the first big surprise. I mean, that babies, they were not told what to do. They would just play this music, and then spontaneously they would start to move to the music.
Wow, fascinating. Dr. Zentner, you're a psychologist, but were you led to this interest in music by your psychological study, or was it the other way around? How did you get involved in this?
Yes, it was more the other way around. I was always an instrumentalist. I liked to play the piano, but at some point I decided to study psychology. And it is only with time that I realized that I could combine both. And so actually direct a lot of my research interests into the study of, basic psychological processes of music perception and emotional reactions to music.
Fantastic. Could you share with us, Doctor, your thoughts on why music often plays such an important role in managing loneliness and isolation?
Yes. I think there are 3 points that I would like to sort of, throw up for maybe discussion. And one is that, as you could see in this taxonomy of emotions, most of these emotions are positive emotions.
Yeah.
And basically, and it's in a way you could say that's a bit trivial, but it's not just happiness. It's a spectrum of very nuanced positive feelings. And I think to expose yourself to experience these feelings in a moment of deprivation and isolation and loneliness can actually really be helpful in boosting morale. The second thing is, as we could see, through the work on the neural and infancy basis of music-evoked emotions, I think that these effects cut through the layers of verbal self-representation and reach a deeper pre-verbal sense of well-being. So when you're alone, you think about all sorts of things, and have maybe a not so positive self-image and self-representation. I think music manages to cut through that somehow. Mm-hmm. As we can see with the babies, but also with the neuroscience research. And the third point is perhaps a bit paradoxical, because it might be actually sad music in particular that is helpful in these situations of loneliness and of isolation. Because, I guess it's a common experience. If you're very sad, to see someone jumping around, from happiness doesn't necessarily help you very much. But I think that if you listen to sad music, that kind of gives you the sense, an experience of shared misery. These people who compose the music and all the other people who listen to the music, with great passion, are basically your companions. And so there is an experience of shared misery and social support. Mm-hmm. And so we're no longer really feeling that we are alone or bored, but basically music, as it were, beams the company of a fellow sufferer into your living room.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the questions I'm most often asked about opera is why so many operas are so tragic. We have a few comic operas, but largely composers and librettists have been drawn to tragic themes. And there is an underlying set of archetypal figures that composers love to work out with sometimes very sad operas, but they can, as you say, paradoxically be very uplifting. It's so interesting to hear you say that.
Yes, and there is even some research and empirical evidence for that. So if people are exposed to sad music, it's not sadness in as an aversive state as we know it from everyday life, a state that we want to avoid. But when they listen to sad music, they primarily experience emotions such as tenderness, nostalgia, peacefulness, but also compassion.
Yes.
So there is also this element of empathy that comes into play here. And so they listen to this sad music, but they experience feelings other than sadness. Or maybe initially they are sad, but then there is what researchers would call a hedonic shift, and so slowly your emotions actually do transform into a more pleasant state. Fascinating.
Your research has made it has had an enormous influence on Houston Grand Opera. You've been very influential in our ongoing programs, and Carleen Graham, my colleague who introduced us today, developed a music and empathy program based on your research. And I'd love for her to talk about that a little later when we get into the question and answer period. But I'm so appreciative of you sharing your research and your work, Dr. Zentner. It's incredibly important work for the future of music therapy also. Yeah.
Well,
really.
thank you very much. I think the best reactions are always the unintended ones. Certainly something I didn't expect to be happening, but I'm glad to hear that it is useful to you.
And I also think, being an artist myself and a musician, we are constantly leading young musicians into the music field, but now there's also this enormous growing field of music therapy, and it sounds as though your research and your institute is very much involved in that as well. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we're not really doing music therapy in of itself, but the tools that we develop,
Right.
and there's also another tool about musical abilities that we won't probably go into today, that are used by therapists, and they find it useful. And I think what makes me quite happy is to see that, what once seemed to be just a matter of belief. You either believed in music therapy or you didn't. But now, in the last 20 years, enormous amount of research has accumulated showing that it is actually effective in a whole range of problems.
Yeah. Doctor, do you have a favorite piece of music or a favorite composer or a couple of composers? What do you listen to calm yourself down?
It's always, this question is always very hard, but I think if I had to pick, I like classical music, and I'm a Schubertian. I really like Schubert, perhaps most than other composers, but I like most of them. So
yeah. Schubert has the great sort of joyous melancholy that very few other composers are able to achieve.
Yes, maybe, he cuts exactly as you could see with our research. He cuts through, directly into your emotion, maybe in a way that others don't. And he has a lot of mixed emotions, and that's also characteristic of emotional experience to music. It's never just this emotion or that emotion. And then when I showed you this nice graph, usually these emotions co-occur and blend into each other.
Yeah. Well, I know that our guests are going to have a lot of questions for you later. Thank you for that introduction. Our next guest is a little closer to home. One of my very, very favorite colleagues in Houston in the humanities, Dr. John Price, who's the co-founder of the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences in Houston. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Patrick. Great to be here.
So would you share with us why you believe that music so often plays such an important role in managing isolation and loneliness, and what do you see in your practice related to that?
I will. I'm going to piggyback on Dr. Zentner here. That was fun. That was really nice to listen to. And I'm going to also offer a quote from Rilke. He says, "Perhaps all dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love."
Beautiful.
So I number one, I'm going to contact you, Dr. Zentner. I think your research is fascinating. So when I was asked to participate here, Patrick, I immediately began thinking of an inner other that we are all in need of relating with. I've spoken with a number of folks out there who talk about the many different forms of consciousnesses that exist inside of us. Mm-hmm. And we all know this because we know what a conflict means. And when I get a conflict inside, it's like two opposing parts of me that are kind of warring against each other. And part of the work is holding that tension and trying to see what else emerges out of that, what Jung called the tension of the opposites. So I think in a number of ways, music, the expression of music, and certainly as you just heard, listening to music, taps into something inside of us. It can certainly be an outer other, as in somebody I can relate with, somebody that gets me, somebody that I can understand and they can understand me, but can also be this inner other that's seeking deeper expression. So that's the kind of route that I take with the people that I work with, which is consistently trying to empower them to open to this creative force that exists in us, that many people locate creativity to be the root system that takes us into the divine. And I think that's definitely true in my experience, and certainly with people with whom I work. So I think what I do with folks is really try to help be generative and to tap into their own creative force, which then puts them into relationship with a non-linear part of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Most artists know this idea. I even heard from one of my patients earlier today that was saying, I wrote a poem, but I didn't write the poem. And when you have that kind of worldview, loneliness becomes a conduit, and it becomes an opportunity to experience parts of yourself that aren't so active when we're in deeper social spaces. You know, when we close our eyes and can open to the non-directed thinking that starts to emerge from deep within that we can't really locate in any self. You know, it's not coming from the ego, as a kind of card-carrying Jungian would say.
It's interesting that, you know, you're describing your psychological view of this, but it sounds to me like you're describing music itself.
I know it really quickly, when we start looking into theories of music, we start looking into theories of personality.
Yeah.
And we start looking into theories of behavior, and we start, you know, when I sit and I come to the Houston Grand Opera and I look down on the orchestra, it's easy to isolate a single musician. But then to hear the harmony and the interrelational dynamics, it becomes more lunar and less solar. Everything flows together in a cohesive whole, and that I think that's probably a better definition of the self as multiplicity rather than some kind of unitary idea of who I am. Because if you tapped into this, you'd hear a lot of different voices with a lot of different pitches and volumes all interacting at the same time.
Interesting. I feel like when performing as a musician, when I'm at my best, which of course isn't always, but you never feel that it's you doing it. You feel
Right.
that you are being a conduit for some larger force.
Well, and that's the vessel. You know,
Yeah.
you've spent many years really refining the vessel and refining, you know, how you play and how you create, and then you open up and get out of the way, and some other force. And we can only use that language because our language really fails us when we start getting into these spaces. Some other force of energy comes through you, and you realize, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And then you would, as many sports people do, they give it up to God. You know, they say, I didn't do that.
Well, you know, the issue always, and I think this is both with the self and with being a musical performer as a representation of the self, there are a lot of things that can distract you and keep you from it.
Yeah.
And the art staying there. I think that's really fascinating. John, do you have examples of how you incorporate music into your healing practice?
I do. I mean, it's not so much. I don't so much use the healing as you can't hear me, can you? Am I off?
Yeah. No, I can hear you.
I don't so much use music in the practice itself. Although I talk to patients all the time about the kinds of music that they're listening to, and we relate to the music that they're listening to. We speak in music, but what I certainly do is encourage people, whether it's singing in the shower. And anybody listening or watching, if you haven't sung in the shower recently, just like Hallie's doing right now, which I'm totally down with, yes, sing in the shower. That all of a sudden is you're giving voice. And my wife was taught by a vocal coach once that one of the reasons why people who are doing voice lessons start to emote in interesting ways is that when we vocalize, we tap into different emotional centers that tend to be reserved for when we're either very happy and exuberant and our voice goes high and we make great big sounds of laughter, or we're sad and we go low. And so as you vocalize, you are moving into those emotional spaces, and you tend to unlock things that you didn't know were even there. Hence the reason you tap into other selves.
Yeah. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were a rock musician, right? Before you became a psychologist.
Yeah, well, I'm still a rock musician in my mind, you know. Yes, I played music professionally, and I did some touring, and I found psychotherapy. And something Freud said that really had to laugh about at one point. He said that all psychotherapists are repressed artists, and I'm definitely not a repressed artist. I'm a very active and expressive artist, and if anything, it's the holiest experience that I participate in when I'm creative. So I certainly mean to try to get people to color outside the lines, to experiment with how they express themselves, to tap into deeper ways, to walk differently, to verbalize differently, to dance around your house differently than you've ever done it before. And believe me, you unlock things that you didn't know were there.
We have a video of a record that you recently made. Tell us a little bit about this.
This was cool, and your participation was much appreciated. So my colleague Rodney Waters and I created a band called Spirit and the Trickster, and we essentially recorded a record remotely. As soon as this whole COVID shutdown happened, we thought, well, great, let's just use the opportunity to do something creative. So we had a guy in Austin that has the studio, a guy in San Francisco that does the mixing, a cellist in Chile, and a violin player in Montenegro. And I recorded in the mornings and put out this album. So it was just kind of another one of those holy things that we do to deal with isolation.
So you're the vocalist,
Mm-hmm.
and did you write the song?
Yes, I wrote the song. I sing, play guitar, and then Rodney is the pianist. And
Well, tell us about the song. What are we going to hear?
so this was a song written a long time ago, actually. Ironically, though, it's called Mask, and it takes on a new meaning, certainly. But I wrote it about 2 years ago, and it really is about the masks that we wear in culture and how often we have to sacrifice our own individual to be in service to cultural norms that we really aren't so authentic. But in order to play the game with everybody in collectivity, we have to adapt. So that's kind of about the personal sacrifices that we make in our adaptations.
Right. Well, great. Let's hear this, and we'll talk about it after.
Thanks, Patrick.
Little daydream sends me slowly off to sleep, meeting memories of those around the table I can't keep. As the sun greets the night and breaks the magic of the dark, the writer of your reason takes his place to make his mark. In many ways I know there's something just beneath the field. The polar forces leading me to places underneath, where hidden secrets live, known to the chambers of your heart. This is only a beginning in how many stories start. At least the people from Going Wild formed in their image as a child, held up high. Colonize, there's no opposition. Paradox, where's the tension? So I'll put on the face that you want me to, walk this way and sing songs for you. And even though I'm hurting, you won't know it. Of this I'm certain, that's just what masks do.
So beautiful, John. Thank you. So these are Jungian pop songs.
They are. You know, we initially wrote a series of songs based upon a section of the Red Book that Jung wrote. And we presented a lecture series and then did the performance at the Jung Center here in Houston. And we just really enjoyed it. And certainly the process was really exactly what I was talking about earlier. It gave a lot of meaning to things that we were going through personally, things that we were trying to work through intellectually. And there we had it.
It's beautiful.
Thanks, Patrick.
What I'm hearing from you is that one of the ways music is best used in isolation and loneliness is to sing and move yourself.
I totally agree. And do things differently than you've done them before. I mean, I lead a retreat, and when people come into the retreat, I tend to say, look, you're here for about 5 or 6 days. If you're used to speaking, be silent. If you're used to doing yoga, go take a walk. If you're used to putting your pants on your left leg first, put them on your right leg first. And we just get to dislodge certain tensions that have existed in our lives, and that's behavioral, that's spiritual, that's emotional, that's social, and we want to shake things loose, and all of a sudden something beautiful tends to emerge. And it can be scary, of course, at the beginning, because we have that little egoic anxiety that tends to say, oh no, something different.
Yeah. Amazing. I love the work you're doing, and it's such a great pleasure to hear from you.
You too, Patrick. You guys do such great work. I love all the shows you guys put on. Thank you.
Well, we're eager to be starting to do them again, we hope. But
I can't wait. I'm in line.
I know our guests are going to have some questions for you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks
today. What a pleasure to introduce Stephanie Blythe, who I have known for, we'll say, a quarter of a century, probably. And Stephanie, you're one of the colleagues in
Sorry,
the
I don't have any sound. I can't hear you, Patrick.
You can't hear me? My sound is on. My sound is on. Andy, do we want to see if...
Sorry.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you at all.
Okay. Andy, maybe you can type to Stephanie and see if she can at least know when I'm asking her a question. Stephanie,
my speakers were fine for the guests, but not for you. I can hear the guests, but I can't hear you.
Okay, just a second.
Okay.
Stephanie is, of course, one of the great...
I think I'm going to leave and come back. How about that? Should I leave and come back? See what happens?
Oh, okay, we can try that. Sorry to our guests, we seem to be having a few technical difficulties. Stephanie Blythe is one of the great opera singers in the world, with an enormous repertoire, everything from Handel and Rossini to Wagner. And what she has done since the coronavirus started was a regular song series from her house, accompanying herself on the ukulele. And this is not a normal activity for an opera singer. Stephanie, can you hear me now?
I can hear now fine.
Okay, well, everything's perfect then. You just needed to step out of the room and come back.
I was just clearing my throat.
I have just sent encomiums of praise your way while you were coming back, and that we've known each other for so long, and that I admire your work so much, and particularly in this pandemic time where you've been, getting out your amazing ukulele and recording songs to share with the public. First of all, how did you get started playing the ukulele? That's not a normal thing for opera singers.
Well, it should be.
It should be.
Right. I think it should be. I started playing because I was doing. I started doing more cabaret, and my cabaret partner Craig Terry and I were talking one day, and I said, a lot of these songs were written on the ukulele. I should play at least one of them, don't you think? And so in 2011, when we did our very first Kate Smith show for Lincoln Center, he gave me a ukulele opening night. And it was this beautiful soprano ukulele. I tried to play it, and I thought, these meat hooks can't play a soprano ukulele. Come on. And so the very first summer that I tried to play it, I broke the G string, didn't know how to restring it, and I put it away for a couple of years. About 4 or 5 years ago, I decided to take it out again, and I thought, well, maybe I should just get a larger ukulele. So I started playing tenor ukuleles, and now I realize I can play any size, including the soprano. It's no big deal. But now I play. This is my favorite ukulele. This is Big Blue, and this is a tenor ukulele, And I'm now actually, back in August, I became an official artist of Lonnie Kai ukuleles. So
Of course
that's the
you did.
last line of my bio now. Ms. Blythe is an official Lonnie Kai ukulele.
Of course you did. Did you grow up playing the guitar?
I did not.
You
No,
didn't?
I played the flute.
Yeah, I remember that you were
Very difficult to play the flute. I was a flute and bari sax player, and very difficult to do that and sing. But
fair enough.
what are you going to do? But I started to play, and it actually became a really wonderful. I call it my musical Prozac, because I'll sit at night. I started just learning 3 chords, and I'm self-taught, and I just started learning songs.
Wow.
And I'd sit at night before bed, and my husband David would sit next to me, and we'd just sing, go through a book and sing, a dozen or so songs before bed at night. And he knows all the words to everything. And so it became something that I did whenever I felt like I just needed to just take a breath.
You've also been keeping a song repertoire alive that is very, very vibrant.
Yeah.
Set of songs that are in danger of being forgotten always.
I do have a tendency to lean towards 1910 to 1930.
Yeah.
And when we talk about American Songbook, we tend to go 30 to 50.
Right.
And the earlier songs, there are some really beautiful pieces that have been written.
Oh yeah.
And they're not difficult to play. And I just, as I've continued to practice, as you know, when you practice, you just get better at it. And now I actually have a concert series that I do. I started in November with Our Concerts.live, and we're doing a concert every 2 months online that is partially live, partially recorded. Sometimes I have guests. My next concert is on February 13th and at 7:00, Our Concerts.live. And it's just with me and my drag alter ego.
Fabulous.
So me and Blithely Ortoni are going to do a Valentine's Day concert.
All right. We want to hear more about your drag alter ego. But you mentioned Kate Smith. And for some of our guests who may be on here today, who may not know Kate Smith, briefly tell us who Kate Smith was.
Kate Smith was the voice of America for a very long time. She started singing in the early 30s, and she was she was a vocal prodigy. She never took a voice lesson, of which she was not proud, quite frankly, but she never took a voice lesson. She had one of the most wonderful, not a torch. She was not a torch song singer. Right. She was a beautiful belter, I would say.
Yeah.
She had an extraordinary catalog of songs. She had one of the very first radio programs for singing and also for talking. She was a remarkable force of nature.
Absolutely.
That found her way. And personally, I was drawn to her originally because she was a beautiful fat singer, and I related to that, and I was completely enamored with this woman who did not look like everybody else, and who ended up becoming a household name, and was very, very is an important fixture in our culture, especially during World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephanie, do you have a video that you could share with us, and what is it, if so?
I do. This is actually from my Christmas concert.
Great.
It's a duet between myself and my drag alter ego Blithely Ortonio singing Jingle Bells.
Absolutely great.
So what do you think? Do you feel any better?
No.
I bet if you sing, you'll feel better. I bet you will.
It's all about singing with you.
Oh, come on. Your favorite Christmas song?
You don't know it.
You know what it is. Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way.
I love it.
Oh,
what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey! Jingle bells, jingle all the way.
This song kills me.
Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Your verse. Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh. O'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtail ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight. Ho! Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Hey, jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. My verse. Now the ground is white, go it while you're young. Take the girls tonight and sing this sleighing song. You know I will. Just get a bobtailed nag, hey, 240 at his speed, and hitch him to an open sleigh, and crack, you take the lead. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Hey, jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Hey, jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Last verse, it's all yours. A day or two ago, I thought I'd take a ride. Soon Miss Fanny Bright was seated by my side. The horse was lean and lank, misfortune seemed its lot. We flew into a drifted bank and we got upset. Ho! Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Jingle, jingle, oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Now don't you feel better?
I do.
Of course you do. Thanks for being here, Blithely.
No problem.
I really miss you, kid.
I miss you and I love you.
Oh, you're so sweet.
I know it.
Take care. Be good. Wear a mask.
I'll do it.
Oh my God, that's so amazing, Stephanie. Not many people get to sing with their male alter ego. That's
Well, listen, he's my inner other.
love it.
He's my, like Dr. Price was
Like
talking about. He's
Dr.
my
Price
inner other.
said.
This is a person I've had in my psyche since I was a teenager, and I'm fortunate enough that I got to the point in my life where I could actually express it outwardly.
I so admire that. Stephanie, how has sharing your music online digitally influenced your experience of social isolation and loneliness through the pandemic?
Well, I can tell you that I had an experience last night where I was feeling really isolated in the middle of a snowstorm and kind of just my adrenaline running nonstop. And I just thought, I'll go online and I'll Facebook Live a show. So I did like a half an hour, just a half an hour set.
Yeah.
And I felt enormously better afterwards because I had shared something with a group of people that I love. And the thing that's difficult about the pandemic for performers is we're still practicing. We're still getting ready to get out there and perform. And so it's sort of like a horse in the starting gate that never gets the gate open. So
Yeah.
that's what this is for me. It's sort of letting it out in dribs and drabs. And it makes a difference because I know that from my feedback from people, that it's helpful. I've had a lot of people write to me privately to say thank you because it makes them feel better. And I think that it as your two venerable speakers here have said, this is exactly this shared experience is what helps people deal with this isolation. And it certainly has helped me. And if I can help someone else through that, that's wonderful.
You certainly have. Many, many people. I hear it too about your show. Is this June?
This is June. She's my other battle. My other battle against isolation right there. I'm very fortunate. I'm isolated with 2 dogs and a husband. So
that's fantastic.
Not so bad.
Well, Stephanie, to get our question and answer session started, and Dr. Zentner, Dr. Price, Stephanie, we're so happy to talk to all of you today. Stephanie, to start our question and answer session, what are you most looking forward to after the pandemic is over?
What I'm looking forward to most is to being able to teach maskless. Is to see my students. I'm the artistic director of the graduate vocal arts program at Bard Conservatory, and the notion of singing in public again is really enticing to me. But for me to be able to see my students sing for me in a master class without wearing a mask that's what I'm really looking forward to, because they are so they're just feeling it. Everybody's feeling it. So that will be something.
Thank you. Dr. Zentner, we have a question about, could you discuss the use of music with adolescents? Is there a particular way that music affects that age group differently?
Yes, I think so. I think that adolescence in adolescence, music has an maybe uniquely powerful emotional effect on us. I mean, it always has, as we could see even at the baby stage, but I think that it runs particularly deep in adolescence. And of course, it is also a period of identity formation. So the music that we select is a means also of expressing who we are or we want to be. And so I think that for these two reasons, the emotional receptivity and also turmoil of adolescence provides a very good match with the emotional force of music. But it's also important for for identity formation, and it's also important for emotion regulation. So music obviously often helps us to, kind of cope with our emotions, and these emotions run in all sorts of directions during adolescence, and that's where music also comes in. And maybe a final thing I can say is that, and that's maybe a little bit out there or a strange association, but adolescence is a time where possibilities in life are still infinite. Yeah, you can become this, you can become that, and so on. And there's just an infinite quality to music, I think. So much is possible in music, and it's not constrained by an object that it refers to, like, in novels or in painting. And there is maybe that's also something that really grabs the adolescent somehow.
And we certainly always seek out the things that comforted us as adolescents.
Yes.
We seek that forever. There's another question, not directed to any particular person. I'd like to start with Dr. Price on this. Here's the question. After working with vocalists all day long, I often feel that all I want around me afterwards is silence. I don't often listen to music unless it's work-related. So if I do listen to music, it's often dance music or world music or belly dance music, or music that's just completely different from my full-time life. Do you find others living like that too? How would you relate that to musical silence, to emotion?
Yeah, one thing also on the adolescence piece too, I think it's important that we remember that we require that kids and young people enter into our world almost consistently. And so it's extremely important to begin to relate to kids by entering into their world. So if your kids are listening to music that you don't like, stop it. meaning stop disliking it and
Right.
get in there with them and start listening to it and ask questions about it and allow for your own taste to expand. That's the first thing, based on what I was saying before. So the second piece, and I'll be quick, is that I'm immediately thinking silence is music. And in a composition, you can use silence in really beautiful ways. And so you're using silence in a beautiful way to texture your musical experience. And so it's not so much a retreat away from music. It's a surrender to something that's so important and valuable to all artists. We know how to use blank spaces. We know how to use texture in a way that, whether you're a photographer and doing negative space, or you're a musician that's allowing for silence to become pregnant and allow for the anticipation to grow and build, or you've been oversaturated and you need some space. So I'll pass the baton, but that's I certainly think silence is musical.
Yeah. Stephanie, do you have a comment on silence? You teach all day too. You know, we can't hear you, dear.
Sorry, I'm muted for the dog. I apologize. I do teach all day, and when I'm singing and I'm working and I'm in rehearsal, I rarely listen to music, only because the silence. I just feel like I'm being constantly assaulted, and I need, not assaulted, but you understand what I mean. But I also rarely listen to classical music. Rarely. I spend most of my time, if I want to be calm, or I want to kind of center myself, I have a tendency to listen to Spanish Baroque music. And because rhythm is very, very, very common to me. I love rhythm, especially complex rhythm. So I would listen to anything. Also The Police. I would listen to The Police for Stuart Copeland, because there's just something about that rhythm that I love. And I listen to a lot of Antonio Carlos Jobim. But that if I do that, it kind of centers me. It resets my brain.
Right. You've got very you have the widest range of music, both as a performer and as a listener, of many of my classical colleagues. I must say, Stephanie Blythe has like huge range of things.
Well, I grew up with a jazz musician as a father, and he didn't listen to vocal jazz. So I really started out very young. I mean, I thought that it was hip to listen to Sergio Mendes in Brazil '66, and I still do.
That's pretty hip.
Yeah, come on.
I love that Dr. Zentner said Schubert, although I know you weren't saying exclusively Schubert. But Dr. Price, what about you? What's your music you listen to?
I listen to a lot of piano music, ambient piano music, and then I listen to a lot of a band called Sigur Rós, and they're out of Iceland, and they're one of my favorite bands in the world.
Wonderful.
I like all music.
Yeah.
I've taken to actually making charts for Schubert songs on the ukulele.
Awesome.
I have a very good one for Di Forelle.
Wow.
I was just about to ask, I think we need to wrap up, Stephanie, but that the fact that you're engaging in so many different forms and types of music, has that something to do with emotion, that you're seeking to experience different emotions, or is that just sort of a side effect?
It is completely emotional. It is totally tied up in emotions, and it's the music that I choose to listen to and what I choose to sing is completely tied up with that. And I have to say that allowing this alter ego to come out, this other that I've been, contemplating for so long, has been one of the most cathartic things of my life. And it's enabled me to be the inner rock star I always wanted, which I know, most singers have that somewhere.
Yeah.
You've got it somewhere. Everybody wants to be Steve Perry. I don't care who you think.
I think you've achieved that. Yeah. I could happily keep this discussion going for the rest of the afternoon. I'm so grateful to all three of you for being here today, and what incredible information for our guests.
Yeah.
Thank you. Carlene?
Yes, wasn't that just, I knew that, being a good friend of Stephanie's, Patrick, I knew that I wanted her to share the duet with herself with Blithely, because in fact, I would have loved to have had a whole I'm sure the psychologists could have had a whole other conversation about how that translated, but we wouldn't want to get to.
They talked about the presence of the other, and
exactly. But it's just so amazing that to actually hear and see that represented, is such a treat. When I first heard it, I remember it just took me, I couldn't wrap my brain around it at first. It was so fascinating, and it's just lovely. So we're so grateful to all three of our guests, I think. And Patrick, I need to ask you quickly, what music do you go to when you're lonely and you need to feel connected? What is your music?
It varies from time to time throughout my life, but the constant is Mozart. And I'm always finding Mozart compositions that I didn't know very well, because there's such a vast amount of music, but not necessarily works that I've performed a lot myself. I don't listen to the Marriage of Figaro really very often or anything like that, but I find that what lights my spirit up always is Mozart.
Yeah, it is. Dr. Zentner mentioned Schubert, and with the birthday celebration and everything, there's been lots of Schubertian music out there, and I have found that to be just a joyful reminder of that. Again, it's that combination of, that mixed emotion that he so beautifully renders in his, I think, art song, but of course, everything he writes.
Well, and again, there's so much Schubert. He wrote so much.
And he lived so little. He had such a short life. Yeah. And I found myself the other day saying, how does someone get that much? He had so much output in such a short amount of time with no technology, and that's impressive. Exactly. Well, thank you, Patrick. And to wrap up, I hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. We were really excited to share this with you. Upcoming, our next episode of Music and Healing will be streamed on March 2nd at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're also bringing back HGOCO's award-winning Star-Crossed web series in late February. So make sure you check us out for that. And then be sure to share this video if you liked what you saw and heard, and follow us on Facebook and YouTube for up-to-date event details. And for more information about upcoming digital programming through the Sarah and Ernst Butler digital series, or about the array of programs offered by HGOCO, the Community and Learning Initiative of HGO, visit hgo.org. I hope you all have a wonderful day and that you're able to be a little less lonely. Thank you.